A 23-year-old serial killer was convicted in Essex County, New Jersey. He murdered at least 3 women and nearly killed another woman.
And told me that
the monster should never see daylight again.
A convicted serial killer in New Jersey is sentenced to 160 years in prison.
What could he have ever gone through that would give him such a dislike to his own sister? I can't even imagine.
On September 1st, 2016, the stillness of a quiet New Jersey neighborhood was shattered by a raging inferno. As flames consumed an abandoned building, firefighters battled through the smoke, only to uncover something far more terrifying than the fire itself. Inside the scorched wreckage lay the charred remains of 19-year-old Robin West. At first glance, it looked like a heartbreaking accident. A young woman tragically caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the truth was far more disturbing. As investigators peeled back the layers of the case, a dark and calculated pattern emerged, one that pointed to a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. And the most chilling detail? No one could have imagined who he was, or the twisted motives behind his spree. This is the haunting story of Khalil Wheeler Weaver, a serial killer whose 4-month reign of terror would plunge an entire community into fear and send detectives into a desperate race to catch him before he killed again. At just 19 years old, Robin West was trying to carve out a life of her own. Born in Philadelphia, she was one of 3 children raised by an assistant pastor. But Robin's childhood was far from easy. She spent time in a facility for children dealing with behavioral and mental health issues, time away from the warmth and structure of a home. It was a tough beginning, but Robin was tougher. Despite the struggles, she blossomed into a vibrant, adventurous young woman who loved to sing and dreamed of something more. When she turned 18, she left home in search of independence. She began working as an exotic dancer, a job that eventually led her into sex work, a path she chose to support herself, to survive, to be free. By August 2016, things were going relatively well. She was building a life on her own terms. That month, she and a friend decided to take a quick trip to New Jersey, just a few nights away for some fun and a change of scenery. But what began as a carefree getaway would soon unravel into a nightmare. On the night of August 31st, Robin and her friend were walking through the streets of West Orange when a silver sedan pulled up beside them. The man behind the wheel was smooth, soft-spoken, and described later as sweet and charming. He asked if he could speak to Robin. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was trust. Whatever the reason, Robin got into the car with him. He drove her to an abandoned house on Lakeside Avenue. No one knows what happened behind those boarded-up walls. The only certainty is that Robin West never walked back out. At around 2 a.m. on September 1st, emergency services were called to the scene. The house, the same house Robin had been taken to, was engulfed in flames. The fire raged through the night, reducing the structure to ash and ruin. When the flames were finally extinguished and the smoke began to clear, firefighters made a discovery that would shake them to their core. Inside the charred wreckage was the burned and unrecognizable body of a young woman, so disfigured by the flames that it was impossible to tell who she was. The scene raised more questions than answers. Who was this woman? Why had she been inside a seemingly abandoned home? And what or who had sparked the blaze that turned the house into a tomb? As investigators worked tirelessly to identify the victim, they had no idea that a predator was already steps ahead of them. Somewhere nearby, the killer was watching, calm, composed, and already planning his next move. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the body was finally identified. Using dental records, authorities confirmed what her family had feared. The charred remains belonged to 19-year-old Robin West. But by then, her killer had already set his sights on his next victim. Identifying the body felt like a breakthrough for investigators, but that moment of progress was fleeting. Just weeks later, the killer struck again. Only this time, he was more methodical, more careful, and far more ruthless. He erased nearly every trace of his crime, leaving detectives grasping at shadows. While Robin's charred remains awaited identification, the killer had already selected his next target in the shadows of Orange County. On October 22, 2016, less than 2 months after Robin West's murder, 33-year-old Joanne Brown became the killer's next target. Like Robin, Joanne had faced her own battles. She struggled with mental health issues, including bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And like Robin, she had chosen a path that made her more vulnerable in the eyes of society. After graduating from high school, Joanne began working as an exotic dancer under the stage name London. Eventually, she transitioned into sex work, a decision shaped by survival, not desire. That afternoon, Joanne and a friend were sitting outside a Popeyes restaurant, sharing conversation and a moment of calm. Then a car pulled up. The man behind the wheel wanted to speak to Joanne. He was polite, even charming, just like he had been with Robin. Without hesitation, Joanne got into the car and they drove off, leaving her friend behind on the curb. It might have seemed like just another client, just another transaction. But this ride would not end like the others. As they drove through the streets, Joanne suddenly realized she had left her phone behind. She asked the man if she could borrow his. He handed it over without resistance, and she used it to call her friend, perhaps to reassure her, perhaps to share their location. She had no way of knowing that she had just handed herself over to a killer. Using his phone, she managed to call a friend, just to let someone know where they were. But the truth was, she had no idea where he was really taking her. They drove aimlessly for what felt like forever, until they finally stopped at a decaying abandoned building in Orange County. What happened next can only be described as a descent into pure horror, an act of cruelty that showed a complete disregard for human life. Inside those crumbling walls, the man strangled the 33-year-old woman to death. Then, with chilling precision, he wrapped her lifeless body in duct tape and bound her tightly. But he wasn't done. He picked up his phone, Joanne's friend's number still saved from the earlier call, and dialed. When she answered, she was met with silence. No words, just the sound of heavy, slow breathing. For minutes. And then he hung up. Worried and confused, Joanne's friend tried calling him back, but he never picked up. That unanswered call would be the last trace of Joanne. From that moment on, she vanished without a word, without a sign. No one saw her. No one heard from her. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Weeks would pass before the horrifying truth came to light. Her lifeless body, hidden and discarded like it meant nothing. But while Joanne lay dead and forgotten in that abandoned building, the man responsible didn't stop. As Joanne lay bound and forgotten in that abandoned building, the killer turned his predatory gaze toward a woman who would accomplish what the others couldn't: survive. His next victim was 34-year-old Tiffany Taylor, but her story would unfold very differently from those who came before her. Tiffany was born and raised in New Jersey, but after high school, she moved to Orlando, full of ambition and promise. She enrolled in college, where she studied music and psychology, determined to build a better future for herself. But life had other plans. When she became pregnant, everything changed. She dropped out and returned to New Jersey, hoping to rebuild, but the struggle was real. Faced with mounting bills and limited options, Tiffany turned to sex work as a means of survival. In early November 2016, she began receiving strange text messages from a number she didn't recognize. The sender was a man, persistent, aggressive, and oddly desperate. He made it clear he wanted to sleep with her, but Tiffany wasn't interested. She ignored him, told him no. But he wouldn't let up. He kept messaging, he offered compliments. Then persistence turned to pleading, and eventually money. He told her she could name her price. Any amount, whatever it took. And that's what caught Tiffany's attention. She didn't know who he was or how he'd gotten her number. But with bills piling up and a child on the way, she started to consider the offer. She had no idea that the man behind those messages was a killer and that she was being lured into a trap. She had finally agreed to meet the mysterious man, but not for the reason he thought. She had a plan of her own: to rob him. On November 15th, she met him at a motel in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He arrived wearing a ski mask, his identity hidden, his intentions unclear. That night, they decided to go for a drive, with Tiffany behind the wheel, still thinking she was in control. But she wasn't. As they cruised through the dark streets, the man casually asked her to pull over, said he needed to relieve himself. But the moment the car stopped, he struck. A sudden, brutal blow to her head sent Tiffany spiraling into unconsciousness. When she came to, her hands were cuffed, her mouth sealed shut with duct tape.
Lifting up, like right here around my mouth, because he had it kind of wrapped, like all around like this, up to my nose.
Panic set in, but the nightmare was only beginning. He assaulted her viciously, all while pressing his hands around her throat, nearly choking the life out of her. She drifted in and out of consciousness, caught in a cycle of pain and terror. But even in the grip of death, Tiffany fought to survive. Somehow, she managed to think clearly. She crafted a plan, a desperate gamble to escape.
I knew that he was going to kill me now. So my every thought was plan A, plan B, plan C, and so on to get away.
And then came the most shocking moment of all. During the assault, the man removed his ski mask. It wasn't a stranger after all. It was someone she had met months earlier. Someone she thought she knew. Someone she never imagined capable of this. Back in April 2016, Tiffany had first crossed paths with the young man through a mutual friend. At the time, she was living out of her car, vulnerable, but street smart. He was barely 20, 13 years her junior, yet instantly infatuated. What began as innocent interest quickly spiraled into obsession. He begged her to sleep with him, relentlessly. When charm didn't work, he tried persistence. When persistence failed, he resorted to cash. He was consumed by the idea of having her. Eventually, Tiffany said yes, but not because she was interested. She had no plans of following through. To her, it was the perfect setup for a quick score. They arranged to meet at his house. He handed her the money up front, eagerly anticipating what he thought was about to happen. But Tiffany was one step ahead. Before anything could begin, she paused and claimed she'd forgotten the condoms, said she'd just run to the car and grab them. But she never came back. Instead, she bolted with the cash, disappearing down the street and leaving him humiliated and furious. That was the last she heard from him. Until November. That's when the messages started. At first subtle, then unsettling. He hadn't forgotten, and he wasn't done with her. 7 long months had passed since Tiffany's first encounter with him. In that time, she had changed her number, tried to vanish from his radar, but somehow he still found her. And now, trapped in the car with him, bruised, bound, and terrified, she realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was revenge. He hadn't just planned to hurt her, he planned to silence her, permanently. But Tiffany wasn't ready to die. Thinking fast, she played her final card. She told him she'd left her phone back at the motel and that it contained everything. Messages, names, details, enough to connect him to her if she turned up dead. It was a bluff, but it worked.
I wasn't planning on dying that day. My every thought was to get away. My every thought.
The threat of getting caught made him pause. Reluctantly, he turned the car around. Tiffany, 4 months pregnant and still handcuffed, was taken back to the motel. The moment the car stopped, she moved quickly, faster than he expected. She darted ahead, reached the room first, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind her. Then she grabbed the phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. Realizing what had happened, the man bolted. He fled the scene, vanishing into the night like a ghost. When police finally arrived, Tiffany told them everything, every detail of the nightmare she had just survived. But instead of help, she was met with disbelief. The officers dismissed her, accused her of being a prostitute, and refused to take her seriously. No report, no manhunt, no justice.
Then I woke up in the back seat and I was being choked out.
But despite the humiliation and heartbreak, Tiffany had done something the others never got the chance to. She lived. She survived a monster who was only just beginning his rampage. With Tiffany's desperate escape still fresh in his mind, the killer abandoned his pattern of targeting sex workers and set his sights on a college student whose digital footprint would become his undoing. It took the killer just 1 week to claim another life. This time, he didn't leave any room for survival. He made sure she was dead. By now, a disturbing pattern had begun to take shape. He was preying on sex workers, luring them in, exploiting their circumstances, and then silencing them for good. But his next target shattered that pattern. Sarah Butler was nothing like the others. She was just 20 years old, a bright, ambitious student at New Jersey City University with dreams of earning her degree. A gifted dancer, Sarah spent her time performing with a local group, pouring her heart into her art. But behind the scenes, she struggled. Making friends didn't come easily, and the loneliness quietly weighed on her. Hoping to connect with new people, Sarah downloaded a social app called Tagged. It seemed harmless at first, a place to meet strangers, maybe even make a friend or two. But for Sarah, it marked the beginning of the end. On Tagged, she struck up a conversation with someone using the name Lily Act Rock. The exchange started casually, friendly, harmless. But it didn't take long before the tone shifted. He began asking if she was interested in making some quick cash. Sarah wasn't sold on the idea, at least not at first. Then came the offer, $500 for sex. It was tempting, maybe too tempting. And that's when Sarah made a decision, one that would lead her straight into the hands of a killer. On the night of November 22nd, 2016, Sarah Butler borrowed her mother's minivan and headed out, unaware that she was driving straight toward her death. She picked up the man she knew only as Lily Act Rock, and together they drove to Eagle Rock Reservation, a remote wooded area cloaked in silence and shadows. It was there, beneath the cover of night, that Sarah met a cruel and unforgiving fate. The man brutally strangled her, snuffing out her young life without mercy. When it was over, he dragged her body off the path, hiding it behind a rock and dry branches like it was nothing more than garbage. Then he vanished once again, disappearing into the darkness, as if she'd never existed at all. By morning, Sarah's family already sensed something was wrong. She wasn't answering her phone. No one knew where she had gone or who she had gone to meet. Worry quickly turned to panic. And in the days that followed, their worst fears began to take shape.
Never in my wildest dream, my daughter was going to take it away from me.
3 days after Sarah vanished, her mother's minivan was found, abandoned behind a rundown building. Inside, investigators found a single clue, a hair extension lying on the floor. But beyond that, there was nothing. No fingerprints, no sign of Sarah. No trace of the man she had met that night. The case seemed to stall. The police had hit a wall. But Sarah's loved ones refused to give up. Her sister, Basania Daly, along with 2 close friends, Lamia Brown and Samantha Rivera, took matters into their own hands. Fueled by grief and desperation, they launched their own investigation. They became detectives, piecing together Sarah's final moments, combing through messages, and tracing the digital footprints the killer thought he'd erased. Their relentless determination would do what the authorities could not: lead them straight to the man responsible for Sarah's murder. Determined to find answers, the group wasted no time. They began by searching Sarah's computer, hoping to uncover anything that might explain where she had gone or who she had met that night. Lamaya, who knew Sarah's passwords, managed to access her social media accounts. When they opened her tagged profile, the truth began to unravel. There it was, an entire conversation thread between Sarah and the man calling himself Lil Yacht Rock. The messages were flirty at first, casual, but as they read on, the tone shifted. The meeting, the money, the plan, it was all there. And now, they had a name, or at least an alias. While Lamia combed through the messages for more clues, Samantha took a bold step. She downloaded the tagged app herself and created a fake profile, hoping to bait the mysterious man into revealing himself. It didn't take long. Within an hour of joining, Samantha's inbox lit up with a message from Lil Yacht Rock. He took the bait. They exchanged a few harmless messages before he repeated his old pattern. He started asking to meet in person. The trap was set, and the walls were beginning to close in on a killer who had no idea he was being hunted. Samantha agreed to meet him, but not before she and her sister gathered every shred of evidence they had found on Sarah's computer and took it straight to the police. They weren't just chasing a lead anymore, they were setting a trap. Lil Yacht Rock arranged to meet Samantha at a Panera Bread in Montclair. What he didn't know was that he was walking straight into an ambush. Plainclothes officers were already stationed in the parking lot, eyes trained on the cafe's entrance, waiting for confirmation. All they needed was for the man to identify himself as Lil Yacht Rock. And when he did, it was over. The officers moved in swiftly and arrested him on the spot. His real name? Khalil Wheeler Weaver. At the station, detectives began questioning him about Sarah Butler's disappearance. But without a body, without physical evidence, they couldn't hold him. Legally, he wasn't a suspect, just a person of interest, a man with a suspicious online alias, and a chilling digital trail. Still, something about him didn't sit right with investigators. The ease, the speed with which he contacted Samantha within just an hour of her account going live wasn't just unsettling. It was predatory, calculated. It confirmed what they already feared. This wasn't random. Khalil Wheeler Weaver was no ordinary man, and they were only beginning to uncover the depths of his darkness.
Have you ever seen that man before in your life?
Never.
So, who exactly was Khalil Wheeler Weaver? Born on April 20th, 1996 in Orange, New Jersey, Khalil came from what most would consider a stable, respectable background. He was raised in a good neighborhood by a family deeply rooted in law enforcement. His stepfather was an active detective, and his uncle had served with the Newark Police Department. Khalil himself aspired to follow in their footsteps. He was even working as a security guard at the time of his arrest, with dreams of one day wearing a badge. On the surface, he seemed harmless. Just another quiet young man trying to find his way. In high school, Khalil was known as a loner, a quiet kid who kept to himself. He didn't play sports, didn't join clubs, didn't stand out. Some called him a nerd, others didn't notice him at all. He had no real friends, no girlfriend, no social life to speak of. But behind that unremarkable exterior, something darker was brewing. When authorities confronted the 20-year-old in that Panera Bread parking lot, he looked nothing like the face of evil. But investigators had a feeling, an instinct that there was more to this young man than met the eye. They were right. Just days after their initial conversation with Khalil on December 1st, 2016, police tracked Sarah Butler's cell phone to the last place it had pinged, Eagle Rock Reservation. There, in the cold silence of the woods, they found her body, discarded and decomposing beneath a pile of branches and stone. That was all they needed. Khalil Wheeler Weaver was arrested, and a full-scale investigation was launched. As detectives dug deeper, what they uncovered was more than just disturbing. It was monstrous. This quiet, socially awkward young man had been living a secret life. One no one in his family or his community could have ever imagined. When investigators finally gained access to Khalil Wheeler Weaver's phone, that's when everything unraveled and all hell broke loose. Buried in his search history were disturbing clues to his true intentions. He had been researching anesthesia and sedatives, methods to render a person helpless. Even more chilling, he'd looked up how to make homemade poisons. These weren't the idle curiosities of a teenager browsing the web. These were the calculated preparations of a predator. But that was just the beginning. The case took a dramatic and damning turn when police searched the car Khalil had used to assault Tiffany. In the trunk, they found a horrifying toolkit: zip ties, lighter fluid, and a body fluid cleanup kit. It was clear. Khalil hadn't acted out of impulse. He had planned every step. This was premeditated, methodical, cold. And in that moment, an unbearable truth came crashing down on the investigators. Sarah Butler might still be alive if they had believed Tiffany, if they had taken her seriously. Now, it was too late. Khalil was charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. But in court, he showed no remorse. He pleaded not guilty, claimed he was being framed by the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, painting himself as a victim of some elaborate conspiracy. But the evidence told a different story. For 3 long years, investigators pieced together the case, building a timeline, following every digital breadcrumb he'd left behind. And although the physical evidence was limited, painstakingly so, Khalil had underestimated the digital trail. He was meticulous. He wore gloves. He used condoms. He left behind as little DNA as possible. But it wasn't enough. A trace amount of his DNA was found beneath the fingernails of one of his victims, a final, desperate act of resistance that turned into the key to her justice. Then came the most damning blow: his phone records. Using geolocation data, investigators were able to pinpoint his exact movements. He had been present at every crime scene, the places the women disappeared from, and the remote areas where their bodies were found. It was as if his phone had been writing a confession all along. And in one final haunting detail, police discovered that after Khalil set fire to the house where Robin West's body was found, he left. But he came back. He stood at a distance and watched the flames consume the house and the evidence of what he had done. During the trial, the courtroom fell silent as Tiffany Taylor, the only woman to survive Khalil Wheeler Weaver, took the stand. Her testimony was raw, harrowing, and unforgettable. She recounted, in excruciating detail, the night she came face to face with a killer and lived to tell the tale. Her words cut through the courtroom like a blade, and they played a crucial role in securing Khalil's conviction. In December 2019, justice finally caught up with him. Khalil Wheeler Weaver was found guilty on multiple counts: 3 murders, desecration of human remains, attempted murder, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, aggravated arson, and kidnapping. The verdict was damning, but even then, Khalil clung to his story, claiming he was framed, that he was innocent. The judge didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 160 years behind bars, a lifetime spent locked away with no chance of redemption. But the nightmare wasn't over. Unknown to the investigators closing in on Sarah's killer, Khalil had already claimed another victim, 15-year-old Mawa Doumbia, whose fate wouldn't be discovered until years later.
Serial killers kill 2, 3, or more people, and they typically follow a specific pattern, targeting the same victims.
In March 2022, Khalil was charged with yet another murder, that of 15-year-old Mawa Doumbia. Mawa had vanished on the evening of October 7, 2016. For years, her whereabouts remained a mystery. Until May 9th, 2019, when her decomposed remains were found inside an abandoned house in Orange, New Jersey. She had been strangled and left to rot, just like the others. Authorities believe Khalil met Mawa online. Another vulnerable girl. Another carefully calculated kill. Though she wasn't identified until late 2021, the pattern was all too familiar. Still, Khalil maintains his innocence. Still, he says it was all a setup. But the evidence is overwhelming. The digital trail, the DNA, the victim testimonies. It all paints a chilling portrait of a man who hid in plain sight and knew exactly how to do it. And while Khalil spends the rest of his life behind bars, the families of his victims are left to pick up the shattered pieces. Lives stolen, futures erased, justice served, but never enough to bring back what was lost. Now we leave you with this. Could the police have done more to stop him before he killed again? Did Khalil's ties to law enforcement give him the knowledge he needed to avoid capture for so long? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another case.